Hey everybody, it's Dan. I know it's been much longer than I promised since my last video. Like I said before, I am a student, but now that it's summer, I have more time to get back into chess. This video is the Grandmaster follow-up to my Vienna game video. The game I'm going to be looking at is one from 1935 between two former world chess champions, the Russian Alexander Alekhine and Max Euwe from the Netherlands. Alekhine is white, Euwe is black, and we have e4, e5, and the knight to c3, the Vienna, and knight to f6. You can follow the link on the screen for my Vienna game video to look at all the options white has in this position. They include f4, which can lead to king's gambit territory very quickly, and a fianchetto setup. But in this game, Alekhine goes for bishop to c4. Another reason that I chose this game because I personally prefer this variation, since it allows for pressure on f7 early on. From here, black plays knight captures on e4, and white plays the queen out to h5, threatening checkmate on f7. To deal with the threat, black plays knight to d6, simultaneously protecting f7 and hitting the bishop on c4. White simply backs the bishop up to b3, keeping the pressure on f7. Now black plays bishop to e7. A wise choice. This gives back the pawn on e5 in exchange for black being able to get its king to safety and keep up in development. The pawn is attacked once and defended 0 times, so it will fall. But here white is patient, developing knight to f3 and adding another attacker to the pawn. I believe this is done in order to avoid losing a tempo, since in this position, if the queen captures on e5 right away, the knight can develop to b6 with tempo. But with the knight on f3 first being played, this allows for the knight to capture on e5, and then the queen gets to e5 without being accessible to the black pieces right away. But to back up a move, when white played the knight capturing on e5, black made a slight miscalculation, underestimating white's bishop on b3. In the game, again, we saw the knight capturing on e5 and the queen recapturing. But here, black had a chance to get white's light square bishop off the board with playing something like castle. And then after white castled, you could have the knight playing to d4. Here, black is going to win the bishop. Something like bishop to a4, simply b5 forces the bishop back. And so instead, what could have happened here is pawn to d3, opening up the other bishop, and then the exchange on b3. The point here is that in this position, black has neutralized the threat from the light square bishop and alleviated the pressure on f7. Again, though, that's not what happened in the game. Instead, the bishop was allowed to just sit on b3 with that constant pressure on f7. A pair of knights are exchanged off, and then black castles. After this, knight to d5 puts another attacker on the bishop on e7, so black moves the rook to e7. White castles, avoiding the pinning of the queen to the king. Black backs up the bishop to f8, and the queen sidesteps the attack by playing to f4. From here, c6 kicks the knight back to e3 and prepares for queen to a5. d4 from white pushes into the center, and black swings the queen over to h5. c3 supports the center, and the black knight hops into e4. White, however, simply kicks the knight away, and really the only square that it has to go to is g5. Other variations, like maybe bishop to d6, fail to the queen capturing on f7 with check, and after the exchange of the queens and the recapture on e4 with check, and then the pawn push to e5, white's position is much better, with the open f-file, the space in the center, and attack on the dark square bishop, and black's other bishop on c7 still needing a couple of moves to get into the game. Alternatively, if we go back here, in this position, something like knight to f6 can simply be met with knight to g4, and again this gives white a strong position against the black king with that pressure from the bishop on f7. So after f3 from white, the knight simply moves to g5. After that, d5 is a tricky move, basically forcing c captures d, because if black plays any other move, just for example something like pawn to d6, h4 simply wins the knight. However, in this position, after c captures d and the recapture, the knight has a square on e6, hitting the queen and defending the fork on c7. Here, white opts to move to the endgame, offering a queen exchange with the goal of exploiting black's pawn structure with the isolated d-pawn in order to convert the win. First, however, black decides to move the queen to g6. This, according to the computer, is not the best move. Instead, black could have simply exchanged the queens and in this way at least white has a somewhat weak pawn structure, which black might be able to exploit at some point. But after queen to g6 in this position, interestingly, the tension between the queens is maintained for a few more moves. White finally completes development with bishop to e3, black prepares to fianchetto the light square bishop, you have rook on a to d1, the bishop playing to b7, and only now does white exchange the queens. Black recaptures towards the center, which also keeps the diagonal that white's light square bishop is on towards the king closed. We have a few more moves with both sides repositioning a bit, and after king to f2, we have a flurry of exchanges which takes place. And once the dust settles, we have a rook and pawn endgame in which white has a clear advantage and is able to squeeze black a little bit more for the win. So white gets a rook here on the 7th, aiming to get its 3-2 majority on the queen side going in order to get a passed pawn. A few pawns are taken off, and white hits a check. The king retreats, and here white moves pawn to a4. Later on, Alekhine looked at this move and concluded that it was a positional mistake on his part to push the pawn right away. The reason, he said, was that the pawn pushing now gives the black rook access to a3 and b3. Instead, what Alekhine said he should have played was king to e2. And I'll just flip through the moves he proposed, and eventually we get to a point where white has two passed pawns which are very, very fast, and a king that is not really going to be susceptible to attack. Black's position here is just lost, and this would have been, according to Alekhine himself, a much cleaner win. But again, if we go back to this position here, after white hits check and the king retreats, you have the pawn pushing immediately to a4. From here, there are only a few more moves. I'll just run through them quickly because there's not much to say. The black rook gets behind the b-pawn, which just pushes, and after which the king starts to move over to attack the rook and chase it to d4. White's rook comes down to get the pawn on b6, voluntarily giving up the a-pawn, but it doesn't matter, because white here threatens a rook exchange, which of course black must avoid, otherwise the pawn would promote, so the rook runs back to the only safe square d4. But after the pawn pushes to b6, black resigns, because there's no way to stop the pawn from promoting without losing the rook. So that's the Vienna game, as played between two former chess champions, with Alekhine defeating Euwe. Alekhine was world chess champion from 1927 until 1935, when Euwe defeated him in the match from which this game is actually taken. However, Alekhine wasn't done. 2 years later, in 1937, Alekhine came back and regained his title. This makes Alekhine the only chess champion in history to have repeat titles. Also interesting is that at that point he had emigrated from the Soviet Union and was playing for France, so he brought the title to two different countries as well. The second time, he retained his title until he was defeated by Mikhail Botvinnik from the Soviet Union in 1946. So anyway, that'll do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, I, of course, would love to hear them. And thank you so much for watching, and take care. Bye.